alternate future of the world series, guys. Well, a lot. You can see the Russians occupy some lands and the European Federation does. But the European Federation making an offensive, taking the advantage. Or so they think. They kick the totalitarian Russians back. They kick them far. Well, quickly an offensive begins here, which they think will lead to their victory. As they advance here, take St. Petersburg, this gotta be bad. And they move into the Caucasus. What they don't realize is that they got millions of people ready now. Millions more than the European Federation. What they didn't realize was how fast the Russians could get more forces. How fast they could mobilize forces from their puppets and get them all the way to the front line. And well, they're advancing on multiple fronts, quickly kicking the European Federation out of their lands. Well, they create in Europe basically a safe zone of some sorts. And well, they manage to take the oils, but I don't know if oil is even used by the world in this year, really. It's probably like 2,500 at this point. Maybe 2,300? Hard to say, because this is like 70 episodes in. And started in 2023, maybe? And well, this area is forced to fall, as Russian forces overrun it. And while they move up to the Suez Canal, while their offensive in this area goes really well, with the European Federation making a advance against them, but they quickly get stuck over here advancing, with them now outnumbered about 5-1 to the Russians. Russians, for every 5 soldiers, there's 1 European Federation totalitarian force. They take Cyprus, and well, then they move down and they manage to take Istanbul. And realizing that victory is not good, they start talking about stopping the war as they stop being able to advance. But suddenly, the Russians don't advance as fast. They start advancing slower. But they started advancing into Greece. And realizing that this area was already invaded and they didn't surrender, they decided to move into Poland and get into northern parts of Germany and go down and take Berlin. And once they did that, before the Russians could get any further, with Russia having a victory at this point, the Russians keep advancing because, well, the European Federation isn't able to hold. Well, that's not good. Before they could interfere with this war, the war is already over. So let's see the peace treaty. And it won't be a harsh peace treaty because the European Federation could still build up enough forces to take back their land. And well, let's see the peace treaty. Have defeated the European Federation, but not necessarily crushingly. Taken a few of their puppets in India. They've taken back Iran. They've taken parts of Eastern Europe, parts of there. They've taken back parts of here, the Nordics. And they've puppeted that area. Not much has changed. Well, the European Federation, since it had an embarrassing defeat, decides to invade a bunch of nations to the south. And well, the best way to do this is by allowing this to run in. Which, well, they run into these nations. And while the World Union isn't a fan of this, invading nations for gain, to look less humiliated, but they puppet them all. They make 5 new puppets. Well, puppeting is a good thing, I guess, for sometimes. Well, they managed to get around not being allowed to get other nations to join, because nobody's going to bother or care about these nations. As well, why would you? Well, with new nations added on to the Democratic Union, it's not just Democratic Union, which is the main, which is a massive country, has a few nations be with it. And well, the Russian Federation, seeking war in the future with the Democratic Union, decides to invade these nations so it can have another board, so it can have a front line with them to easily access where they are. I'm not changing the colors of nations because, well, it's easier not to. Well, they invade the Philippines, they invade the rest of, they start invading Indonesia. And then they decide to puppet it all, Because, well, why not? The Democratic Union's goal is to liberate all of those lands, with the European Federation deciding to annex its borders by increasing its size to this. But the Russians, seeing this, as they need to catch up, decide to annex 2 puppets. Yes, 2 puppets. They could have already done this, I guess, technically. But they're trying to make their nation bigger, and by annexing puppets, they both got that one. But the Democratic Union has, well, 2 areas of the world, so they can make a 2-front war on any nation, basically. They could have forces invade there and forces invade here and there. They could have a 3-front war if they wanted. Well, the European Federation, they can only have a 1-front war with them, but they could potentially win the next war. So they lost a lot of coastline. And now they have clean access to the ocean, which is not good. But they also have it here. That's besides the point. And while these countries, there's 2 totalitarian nations and a democratic nation, they could potentially work together against that. But that's uncertain, I would say. I don't know. But they could definitely work together. And while they decide to annex one more puppet. As this is an older puppet, so it's okay to annex it at this point. While seeing this, all the older puppets of the Russian Empire, the totalitarian Russian Imperial Empire, yes, that's its name, the Imperial Empire, well, and they annex these 2 nations. Well, all that's left is probably the empires on the moon going to war, but now we're at part, 14, 15 of the series. We're getting far into the series, because this is part 12. And well, that's pretty much all for today's video. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Wild Mapper out, but not until you subscribe. Bye, guys!